Did you ever want a fast, easy, and a clean way to sync your LDAP or Active Directory to Google Workspace? Or if you are familiar with GCDS, did you ever imagine it as GCDS as a service thing? Well, your wishes or dreams are somehow becoming true. Google has added a new feature that is still beta, however, to Google Workspace. This is called the Directory Sync. Now, I've been seeing this for a while now, and I was planning to test it and see how it works. And so here it is. In this video, I will show you this new feature in action and how you can configure it yourself as well. Now, before I continue with this, please don't forget to like the video so that more people can find it easily. And also, if you would like to consider the option of subscribing, I would be really grateful and I would really appreciate it. So, this directory sync feature is an interesting one really. It is totally serverless and no software installation is required for it, which is really awesome. And as the name states, this is a service that will sync your LDAP based directory such as Microsoft Active Directory to Google Workspace or to Google Cloud Identity if you have that. And while doing this, you will also be able to control the provisioning of your users and groups. Although it's still beta and the options are still probably very limited now somehow, but then the once it goes GA, I'm sure the options will expand and you'll get flexibility in terms of deprovisioning the users. Now, there are many use cases for this. For example, if you are migrating into Google Workspace and you want to keep your current Active Directory as the single source of truth for your users and identities, or if you are implementing a project on GCP or setting up the cloud foundations for your organization on GCP, then most probably you're going to be using Cloud Identity, and then the directory sync will be your way of keeping also your Active Directory as the single source of truth for identities and accounts if you'd like to keep your on-prem Active Directory. Now, the configuration for this is really simple and straightforward. It's just a few clicks and you will be ready and the sync will be up and running. However, there are two main considerations for you to be aware of. First of all, you will need to make sure your Active Directory or LDAP server is using LDAPS or it's running on port 636, which is the LDAPS port. And then you need to let Google Workspace talk to your Active Directory or LDAP server through something called Serverless VPC Access, which is something on GCP, and I will be showing you this in a moment now. And honestly, the second point about connectivity is the very interesting one. I'm just trying to control myself here because this point does involve GCP and I can't just stop talking about GCP recently. So you see, in GCP, when you want to have your serverless applications and services such as Cloud Run or Cloud Functions or App Engine, when you want these to connect to your Compute Engine resources or even to on-prem resources, then you will need to use the Serverless VPC Access. It's going to provision a few VMs in a subnet in your VPC, and these VMs will be used to manage and route the connections from these serverless services. Now, these VMs, of course, are totally managed by Google, and you don't have to worry about that. You need to worry, however, about the cost that is going to be associated with this. And if you need to use such a thing in your deployment or in your environment, then you still have some options and some ways to optimize and control the cost in terms of how many resources are provisioned and the size of these resources and so on. I'm just going to stop here about GCP because again, if you let me keep talking, I'm not going to stop anyways. But then in the case of Google Workspace, it's going to be totally treated as or similar to these serverless services and platforms. So the same way you look at Cloud Run in GCP, you should consider Google Workspace a serverless offer that wants to use the Serverless VPC Access feature to connect to your Active Directory. And luckily for you, I have done this. I have set up a lab to test, as mentioned, the directory sync. And I'm going to show you now the directory sync after it's been configured and the sync, how it should be working. And then I'm going to delete everything, and I'm going to show you the settings and the way to reconfigure all of this in a clean configuration. So if you can see here, this is the directory sync page, and this is the current configuration that I have. You see here the sync is active for the users and all of that. So I have three sections here. There is the connection details, there is the user sync, and the group sync. So when I go to the connection details, again, it's just a name for the directory, you can change it. If I go continue, you will see the connectivity details, and this is specific to GCP. And I will be showing you now the configuration on GCP. And when I go to continue, it asks me to configure my Active Directory. And specifically in this page, there are some points that are not perfectly documented or not accurately documented, but then I will show you that in the demo now. Specifically the host section and the DNS server section and the port and connection type, basically all of this. So, but then the point is there are some poorly documented stuff here that will affect how smoothly your configuration will be. Luckily for you, again, I've just gone through all of that and figured it out. At the end, you'll find the certificate, which is required because you're going to use the LDAPS and port 63 port. Now, I just need to fill these to test the connection, but I will show you in the second demo now how this will be. Now, when it comes to user sync, basically you define the scope. This is the group. Now, if I go there, so basically the point of this is you tell Google Workspace to only look for users that are members of whatever group names that you define here, and only sync these users into your Google Workspace account. And also it will look in the base DN in this OU for these groups. Now this is according to what's documented here, but I will show you in the second demo that this is not totally correct, because what it says here, it says define where to start searching for groups to sync, and they missed and users because if you put the group in this OU only, and if you don't put the users with this group, then the users are not going to be synced. You have to put the users in this OU with the group so that the users are synced as well. Again, I'll show you in the demo. Now, if you go to the, of course, there is the attribute mapping, but I will show you in the demo. And but again, this is about the first name, last name, email address, and how to map them to Active Directory attributes. If you're familiar with GCDS, you will totally understand what I'm talking about, and all of this will make sense for you. If not, then that's fine. I will show you in the demo again how it's going to be. Now, when I go to group sync, it's somehow similar to the users, except for the fact that there is only the base DN value here. So basically, you just define in which OU you want to search for groups so that you sync them to your directory or your Google Workspace or cloud identity. Now, if I just give you an idea about my Active Directory setup, this is the Active Directory that I have. And as you can see, I have an OU called dirsync. Inside this dirsync, I have a group called dirsync. I have three users, dirsync 1, dirsync 2, and dirsync 3. Now, there is a very important note that I want to mention here, which is if I go to this user, you see the email field here. This email field must be filled with the actual email address of the user that you want to sync to Google Workspace. If this email address value is empty, then this whole user object will be ignored through in the sync process, and the sync will not look at it at all when doing the sync. You have to put a value here, and the value must be correct, and basically meaning that this domain must be on your Google Workspace domain, and this will be the user's email address and username as well. Another very important point is these two values, first name and last name. In Active Directory, these are not mandatory values. However, in Google Workspace, these values are mandatory, and you have to fill them in your Active Directory so that they are synced into Google Workspace. So if I remove the last name, for example, for this user, and if I save, and when I do the sync, you will see the sync as succeeded, but when you dig in the logs, you will see that this user failed to sync because the last name was blank, and the sync could not create this. Again, I take it that this is beta. Hopefully in the GA this will be addressed by putting some default value similar to what GCDS does as well. Again, it puts unknown in the blank fields for the first name and last name. Now if I go to the group, again it's the same story. You have to have an email address. And if I go to members, you will see the first user and the second user are members of this group. And these are the users that are synced into the Google Workspace. This third user is not member of this group, so it is not synced. Even though this user is in this base DNOU, but then it's not member of this group, so it's not going to be synced. If I take you to the directory here, you will see the directory user 1, directory user 2. And if I go to groups, you will see the directory sync group with the two members, these two users are members of this group. So these two users are added into this group. So this is my environment, and this is the sync in action while it's working. Whatever I do on my Active Directory, it will be reflected here, which is really awesome and very great. Now in terms of configuration, as mentioned, you will need two things to get this thing configured and working. First of all, you will need LDAPS and a GCP project with billing enabled. Now for LDAPS, I just installed a local CA on this Active Directory server, on this server itself. And once I installed that CA, it issued a certificate for this server. So what I have done next is I have downloaded the CA certificate. Let me see if I can show you that. I've downloaded the CA certificate and I have used it in the configuration in directory sync to make Google Workspace trust the certificate that is issued to this server, thus letting me complete the configuration process on directory sync. Now for connectivity stuff, that's where things get a bit broad and into networking stuff, a little bit. Now you will need to connect the GCP project that will host the Serverless VPC Access configuration with your own on-prem network. Now if you have Active Directory, of course, hosted on-prem, then you have to do this. You can do this with either a Cloud VPN or Cloud Interconnect. And if you look at the supported architectures or connectivity architectures, you will find two models or two options. The first one is the LDAP server hosted in Google Cloud, which is probably very basic and this is the best, I think, in my opinion. Basically, you just put your Active Directory server on GCP and you just connect the cloud identity or Google Workspace to the GCP project through the VPC access, and that will directly access the Active Directory server. But then these are the other two options that I was talking about. If you do it through a cloud VPN, then you have to set up a VPN gateway on-prem, and then that VPN gateway will route the traffic to the Active Directory server. If you do it with Cloud Interconnect, then again you have to do it through a router and BGP stuff, so that the session is established between the on-prem and the Google Cloud, or probably any other cloud as well, However, in my case, this is actually my setup, and notice that I am not using Cloud VPN or Cloud Interconnect because of the obvious reasons. I don't have a static IP, and in fact I don't even have a public IP at all because I'm sitting behind a 5G connection. So I don't know how many levels of NATing that I have between my device, my router, and between the public internet. So unfortunately that's the case for me, but then everything is doable, So in my scenario, this is a Microtech based appliance that I am using because I'm familiar with Microtech, and I have a physical Microtech in my home as well. So I have connected, this is a virtual machine, I've connected both together through a VPN tunnel, whatever, SSTP, L2TP, whatever stuff. And if you notice, this Microtech is sitting in a subnet called production subnet with the range 172.16.16.0.24. And my local network is 192.168.5.1. This is a virtual machine on Hyper-V. This is Active Directory and it's 192.168.5.193. However, as you can see here, there is another subnet which is called Serverless VPC subnet. Now this one is 172.16.19.0/28. It's a small subnet that is required by the serverless VPC access, and this subnet will be used to provision a few VMs, and these VMs will be routing and managing the connection. Now I won't see these VMs, these will be totally managed by Google. However, I just provision the subnet, which means that actually these 3 lines should be on the VPC level, which means that this subnet and whatever is in this subnet will be affected by custom routes that I have created. Because I'm not using Cloud VPN and Cloud Interconnect, then I have to manually do the routing. So I have created a custom routing rule saying that anything that wants to go to 192.168.5.0/24, send it to the MikroTik instance, and this will handle the routing and directing the traffic into the on-prem network. So basically I then configured the serverless VPC access to provision its own VMs inside this subnet, and then connected Google Workspace into this one. This means that Google Workspace can now go through this path and reach my Active Directory and retrieve the users from it. So this is the scenario and this is the architecture that I have. And I talked a lot. So let me now take you to the admin console. I have also cleaned up all of the resources. So I have deleted the users from the admin console and deleted the group as well. I deleted the configurations that I have done for the directory sync. I will also show you the project on GCP so that you can see this architecture as well before we start configuring it. Okay, so this is the admin console or the cloud console for the GCP project. And as mentioned, you will need a project with billing enabled. So keep this in mind, of course, because you will need to use compute engine services and network services as well. So just to give you an overview on this project, let me take you to the compute engine page and show you the MikroTik VM, at least just as an object, just for it to make sense. This is the MikroTik VPN VM, which is residing in US Central 1. And the IP for this one is 172.16.16.2, which is in the production VPC. The second one is a testing VM I only created in the serverless VPC access subnet just to test the custom routes that I have created, only to test the connectivity. So if I take you to the VPC networks, you will see a single VPC that is existing because I deleted the default VPC, which is something I love to do all of the time. So this is the single VPC that I have. Inside it there are 2 subnets. There is the production subnet again, and there is the LDAP connect subnet, which is the one for the private or serverless VPC access. And again, as you can see, it's a very small subnet, /28. This production one is /24, so it's a larger one. Now, just showing you the routes as well, just for things to make sense for you. If I go to routes, you will see that I have created a single custom route, which is called to local lab, and the destination is 192.168.50/24. Destination, as mentioned, is the MikroTik VPN instance, which is the router which will take care of the routing and all of this. So this is the current setup. Now the first step that I need to take care of is creating the serverless VPC access, and this is part of the VPC network again, VPC network menu, and you can find it. For now it's at the bottom, or second one from the bottom. Not sure if this will be changed, or by the time you're watching this more stuff will be added or removed, or but anyways, this is the serverless VPC access. You go inside it and then you just create the connector. Now the point is here is, again, we're just allocating the required VMs so that they can act as the proxies or routers or whatever you want to call them. And it's a very straightforward thing. So basically you just type a name for this, for example, local connector, whatever. Now because my MikroTik VM is in US Central, I'm keeping this in US Central. Again, there is a single VPC here. And then I click, or I choose the subnet. So I have the option to either create a custom range or just choose one of these existing ranges that I have. So I'm choosing this one that I have previously created. Now I can click create with this, fine, and that will be all except that the cost stuff in here, which are very awesome. But then to control the cost or to optimize for this lab, you go to the scaling settings, and in the scaling settings, and again it makes sense because this is considered a very critical service at like an infrastructure level stuff. So you need to make sure this connector is available all of the time for the services. So it makes sense to have these settings if you're going production. In my case, I don't need to use all of these. So I think before I tried to use one, but it didn't like it. So let me see. Yeah, so the minimum instances here are 2. And the maximum should be at least 1 instance more than the minimum instances. So I should type 3. If I type 2 also, it will not like it. So yeah, 3. And then the instance type is the E2 micro. You can go to the absolute minimal size, which is the F1 micro, which will save the cost more, except like a few dollars only, whatever. And then once you're fine with all of this, you can just click create. So this will take a little while to be created. And while it's creating, there is another very important thing that you have to do, otherwise the setup on Google Workspace will not work, which is called the Data Connector API. You have to enable this API, and the fastest way to access this is by going to the search and type Data Connectors API, and you will see it in the first result under the marketplace. Oh, and this one is done. So basically you go to data connectors and enable this API. It's enabled in my case, but then you just need to make sure you enable this. Once you do that, then you can switch back to the Google Workspace Admin Console and complete the required steps. So just going back to the previous page here. So now as you can see, we have the name of the connector here, which is going to be relevant now. The location or the region, which is US Central 1, and basically that's it. I mean, we need the location and the name of the connector. Of course, the project ID, it's required. The fastest way you can get the project ID is from the URL. This is the project ID. So copied, and then switching back to the admin console, going to, as you can see, it's deleted, no configurations are here or anything. So going to add directory, and then I will click continue here. First bit of information is the name. So MSAD, now I'm going to type 3. As you can see, the directory type here is showing Active Directory, but then in the future they're going to add Open LDAP and Custom LDAP as well, which is very awesome. Then going to continue. Now the GCP stuff. So project ID is the one that I just copied. Fine for a reason. And then the VPC Access connector name, it's pre-filled for us, at least the static stuff. And they left the variables for us to fill, which is very nice because as you can see, it's a little bit long thing. So project ID replaced with this awesome name. Then the region, which is US Central 1. Just copying and pasting. I don't like to type. Then after the region, let me just do this properly. So after the region is the name of the connector, which is this little thing here. Copying this and then pasting that. Then when I click continue, it's going to fill in my Active Directory server details. So again, I mentioned a moment ago that there is some sort of a confusion here, because in the host field they are mentioning the IP address or fully qualified domain name of your Active Directory server. And they even provided an example for the IP, but then the problem is you're going to be using LDAPS, which means an SSL certificate on the server. So if you type the IP here, and then if you try to save the settings and test the connection, it might give you a failure in the connectivity. If you manage to dig into the Active Directory logs, you will find the error about mismatching between the IP address and the server name. Basically, if you don't have the IP in the certificate, then you will not be able to use the IP here. You will have to use the name. this is when the DNS server thing will come in handy, because you can type the IP address of the DNS server here, which will resolve whatever name that you will type here into that, name. Because the name of my Active Directory server is this. Let me actually copy it because I can't memorize that. I just kept the computer name to the default here. So this is my Active Directory full FQDN, fully qualified domain name. And as you can see, it's a private name that is not ending with any public suffix or value here. It's PRI for private. So yeah, so there is no way this will be resolved without a DNS. This is where this will be coming handy now. Now again, the port is 636. That is the LDAPS port, and I'm just using the default. Now base DN is basically, if you're familiar with GCDS, this is where you will tell the directory sync to start looking and searching for objects in your tree, in your domain hierarchy. And if you're having a large structure, then it makes sense to do it into the OU where the users are only. Like if you have the root, node there, then if you have another OU like the business name, the org name, or whatever, then under that computers, users, or location X, then computers, users, whatever, so you just set it to the closest location for the users and groups, so that it does not loop the whole tree whenever it wants to do a sync or anything. And in my case, I'm just going to use the root. And then the DNS server name, this is to help us resolve this. So the IP of the Active Directory itself, because as you know, the Active Directory can be a DNS server as well. Then finally, the authorized account, the authorized account, which is the Active Directory username and password. This has to be formatted as the domain name slash the username. Again, I'm doing lab, so it's like the fancy administrator thing. You need to have a dedicated service account, exactly as this instruction says, to only and give it only the least required permissions to do this job. It's not good at all to do it with the administrator. Now the final step here is, as mentioned, is the certificate. And as mentioned, the certificate that I'm going to upload is the CA certificate, which will tell Google Workspace Admin Console to trust whatever certificate that is going to be found on this server. If you do it with a public certificate, then you don't have to worry about this. You just upload that same certificate without the public key, of course, to the console here, and then click next and test the connection. So I've selected the file here, and then I'm going to save and test the connection. Hopefully everything is good. It might take a little while to be done. And there you go, it's done. So the connectivity has been established, and the Google Workspace Admin Console can now talk to my Active Directory, which is really something very awesome. So now I'm clicking continue. It's time to configure the user sync and then the group sync. So the configuration of the user sync is done through two stages. First of all, you do the configuration, then you run a simulation. Based on the result, you activate the user sync. So as mentioned, there are two fields that should be filled in here. There is the group name and there is the base DN. And the point of these two settings is, basically when you define the base DN, say that I want to define all of the users that are found in the dir sync, which is basically this OU. So let's say I have 1,000 users in this OU and I want to configure this to be the base DN for the user sync. Then there is another option for me to limit the scopes for the users that are going to be synced, which is by creating a group and putting the users that I want to sync in that group, so that only the users in that group will be synced. Now, there is one problem with this configuration here. It's telling you that to define where to start searching for groups to sync, enter a base DN. The problem here is they forgot to mention and users as well, because this is not only going to affect the group that you will define here, it's going to affect the users as well. And I'm going to show you now what I mean with this. Let me fill the group name, which is DireSync. Basically, the point here is any user that I want to sync, they should be a member of this group and they should be in this OU. So if I go back to the admin console, you see that both of the group and the users are in this OU, but let me move this user to outside. So we'll end up only with 2 users. Now the user that I moved out was user or DireSync1, which is actually part of this group, but it's not in this OU. And if you notice, this user is in this OU, but this user was not member of this group. So this is my setup that I want to save and sync. So I will click continue. This is the the Active Directory attributes mapping to the Google Workspace attributes. Now again, if you're familiar with GCDS, you'll understand all of this. It's the the attributes and all of that. You can change and all of this if you want, otherwise you can leave it to the defaults. I'm just going to leave it to the defaults. It's just one setting I want to change, which is the account activation. And because this account or this Google Workspace is mostly cloud identity account, then I don't have the email service active for every user. So I don't want to send the activation email. Basically, this activation email will include the instructions to set a new password. So it's very critical to send the activation email to the user, whether to the primary email or to recovery email if you have that. And once you're done with this, let me set back to this. You click continue and it's showing you now the deprovisioning preference. And again, if you're familiar with GCDS, there was an option to suspend the users in Google Workspace or delete the users in Google Workspace. If you're not familiar, then that's fine. I mean, it's the new experience here. So again, just putting references for those of us who are familiar with GCDS. So if you want to suspend the user here, fine, you can do it. Otherwise, you can uncheck it. I will uncheck this because otherwise it will be a big disaster for my case. And then the other point is, since this is beta, I assume once it goes GA, more options will be added here, such as deleting the users or whatever. Then I'm fine with this. I'll click continue. Again, if you're familiar with GCDS, you will see the safeguards here as something very useful. Basically, the meaning of safeguards is it will abort or block the sync process if it's going to suspend 5% or more of the user accounts. This way you prevent misconfigurations or bulk user suspension, all of this. It's very recommended, and it's very critical that you have safeguards always configured and implemented, whether here or in GCDS. In GCDS, I think that's called exclusions, probably. So you set up the safeguards and then you click the simulate sync. Now what's going to do here is going to connect to your Active Directory, read the configuration and retrieve the users that are affected in the scope, and then tell us what is going to happen without applying the results here. So let me close this. Let me refresh. Hopefully the simulation is done. Yeah, so the simulation is done. When I go to view simulation log, you will see the logs in here. So now you see it did retrieve one user from the source directory, and the reason it was retrieving only one user from the source Active Directory is, first of all, this user is member of this OU and it's member of this group, but then this group has also another member, but it's not in this OU. This is why it was not detected. And this user is not detected anyways because it's not member of this group. So let me add this user and the other one. Let me bring it back to the OU. And let me add the other user into the group. So we'll add the DireSync. And now let me redo let me configure the group sync, and after that I will actually enable the sync. So again, set up group sync here, In the group sync, it's only the base DN. So we'll just type OU equals dir sync. And again, in your case, it's different OU, different base DN, all of this. Okay, continue. Again, mapping the attributes. I'm fine with the defaults. Continue. Again, the deprovisioning, deleting the group. I don't want to do this. So, unchecking this and continue. Safeguards, again, it's very critical and important to set the safeguards and then simulate the sync. Now it will detect one group with 3 members. So when I click close and when I refresh, hopefully it will do the simulation quick. So view simulation log. You will see it found one group and it contained 3 members in that group. So now the simulation results are all fine. Let me enable the sync. And now let me take you to the users. You will see dir user 1, user 2 and user 3. And if I go to groups, you should see the group which is dir sync with the 3 members inside it. So if I take you to direct members, you should see the 3 users that I have synced from my directory. So that's it. When I was working on setting up this lab, I was actually mentally prepared for a lot of troubleshooting and nonsense with everything. And indeed, I have got some issues with the connectivity testing. After the initial configuration, I started to get some errors and all of this. But then all of this sudden, it just worked. It all worked like a charm. And for sure, I wasn't expecting it to be this easy, To a point, I just said to myself when it started working, like, are you kidding me? Like, really? So, I mean, I was not expecting this to be easy at all. Actually, in fact, it does require some networking logic in a way, but then it's just some basics, in routing. Well, yeah, some stuff about firewall and security as well. So yeah, it's not something that's straightforward, but again, it's not something out of the world anyway. I mean, it's all stuff we used to do all of the time, on-prem and all of this. So what I think of this now, well, we have GCDS. It's one of the awesome tools that I work with. But then look at this. Like, this is also awesome. Now for me, this is even more awesome than GCDS. Like, you get to sync your directory with this simplicity. And to get GCP in the middle of this, I would never ask anything more than this, really. I cannot wait for this to go GA and, to see more features like more deprovisioning options. The option to sync organizational units, it's something that GCDS can do, and hopefully this one will do very soon in GA. So hopefully with this video as well, in addition to this documentation that are available for you, you will be able to understand stuff, how this works, and you'll be able to navigate your way around and configure it for your own as well. And definitely once this go GA, I'm following up with another video to make sure that whatever changes happened and whatever features that are added are captured in a more up-to-date and more recent video about it as well. Now, finally, if you want more Google Workspace related stuff, then check out my course on Udemy, where you will get a deep dive into everything in Google Workspace, and you will see how everything works in detail. You will learn about user management, groups management, data compliance and security, email routing, Google Vault, and even much more. You can get it through the link in the video description at a discounted price. And until my next video, stay safe and thanks a lot for watching, and thank you also for your time.